Thank you so much for inviting me. What an interesting topic, ambiguity, and particularly Venturi's notion of complexity and contradiction. I think everyone who's living today has been affected by this thought. And even though we often claim that simplicity is the end of architecture, I think we all acknowledge that that's easier said than done. I started to think about this topic, and of course, what came to my mind is my favorite thinker, who never went to college, apparently. Time is out of joint. It's an amazing thought in Hamlet that time is out of joint. Time is not fitting. The time is not continuous. Time is not jointed. It's disjointed. It's derailed. It's not the time we think it is. And I think it might be worth meditating, especially if one is doing architecture, on this notion that time is out of joint, because so much propaganda in architecture deals with continuity. Everything is continuous. Styles are continuous. Society is continuous. Building technologies seem to be continuous. But this thought, said many hundreds of years ago, suggests that time itself is out of joint. And you perhaps know this great sonnet, "No time, thy shall not boast that I do change. Thy pyramids," and so on, "are nothing novel, nothing new to me. I don't change." It's a thought about the out of joint and the jointing of time in architecture as well. And that's somehow what I wanted to address through showing you some of my projects, which I think deal with this. And more than that, I could say that for us in our time, the out of jointness can be really derived from an event in the 20th century. It is the Holocaust. And the Holocaust has changed everything. You don't have to know much about it. You don't have to be interested in it. But after that event, in which the world had seen what is possible in a kind of avant-garde of violence and avant-garde of ideology, after that event, everything has changed, even if everything apparently is still the same. And then you can say that Hiroshima, right, not so much after, was just another point on that same vector. And so it is my belief, as it is a belief of a number of other great thinkers, that doesn't matter where you are today, what part of the world, what you're working on, what does it look like, it is affected deeply by this out of jointness that comes from somewhere like that. Now, if I know how to do this, my very first project, because I didn't build anything, not even a small building, before I built the Jewish Museum. And by the way, the competition was not for a Jewish museum. It was a competition for a Berlin museum with a jüdische, what they call the jüdische Abteilung. And some were 200 architects from all over the world, very good ones, did just that. They created a big building with what they call the jüdische Abteilung. I did not do that because I believe that you cannot have a concept called a departmentalization in ethnic terms of a people, because Jews are integrated into society. They were part of Germany. They were part of the workforce, not just in the famous names like Albert Einstein and all the people we know from German Jewish history, but just the normal people of Berlin. So I call it voices because the project is based not just on the voices we can hear today, but on the voices we can hardly hear, but those voices do whisper to us. Through the noise of time, they whisper to us, and they do say something. And you don't have to be religious or metaphysical or spiritual to stand in Berlin as I stood for so many years and hear them. There's the museum as it exists, and it is an unusual structure. It's not accessed, in any normal way. You don't enter through the new building at all. You enter through the underground of the Baroque building. You have a kind of tripartite ways that lead through different places. One leads to a dead end, the Holocaust Tower, I call it. It's really, there's nothing more than the sharp edge of light in it. The other one ends at the Garden of Exile, which is a symbolic garden of a very special kind. And the third part of this road leads to a continuity of history across this abyss, across the void. And you notice that it doesn't end in any atrium, doesn't end any. There is no redemptive quality in this building. It's not the building that at some point says, now, we can gather, we understand. There's nothing of that sort. It is just what I think. There is no redemption in the event at all. There is no transcendence of it. It's just part now. And then there's a lateral entrance to the galleries, which are marked by this really, I would say, less visible topography of Berlin. It's an imprint of streets and maps through which you see things that don't seem to make much sense today. Housing blocks, transformed widths of streets, different directions of Friedrichstadt development. But still, there is that emblem that ties it together in some world of light and material and sound. And I have to say that I did base this building on many, really, I would say, or even not architectural ideas. On a story by Walter Benjamin. How do you navigate a one-way street, the Einbahnstraße? I wanted to complete, actually, the third act of a Schoenberg opera, Moses and Aaron, in which he gave it up. And I thought he gave it up rightly. But I could complete it in the echoes of the footsteps of the visitors across the void. It's a kind of completion if you listen to the opera. So, yes, and then I was able to subsequently build a few more things for the institution of which became finally the Jewish Museum. It had 5 different names, by the way, before it became called Jüdisches Museum Berlin. 5 different names, 5 different concepts, what to do with it. So navigating through it, this is the court in the Altbau of the Baroque, which is now, there was no place for parties, there was no place for dinners in the original program. Nobody thought that was needed, but it became a need because it's a highly visited museum. So it's a social space that I was able to construct. And then across the street very recently, the Jewish Museum Academy, it's an old Blumenhalle from the 60s. I was able to insert these large containers, crates, and there's archives there. There are many different facilities. There's a library. So the importance here is that across this abyss, world develops. Young people are interested in things that their parents and grandparents may have not been interested at all, or may have even burned. But history is unpredictable. By the way, I was able to imprint on this museum in 3 languages. It was written in Arabic first, and then Judeo-Arabic, and then I put it also in English and in German. A quote I found in Maimonides, Moses Maimonides. It wrote about 1,000 years ago, a Jewish philosopher who lived in Spain, in Egypt, in Morocco. He wrote some very, very interesting books. But this sentence, hear the truth, whoever speaks it. It's also about ambiguity. What does this statement mean? Hear the truth, whoever speaks it. The speaker is to hear the truth, or hear the truth, whoever speaks it. Whoever, the foreigner, the other, the exile, the immigrant. Anyway, I'm glad that the Jewish Museum permitted me to put this work, and it's a work which I've produced just for that. And it's in Kreuzberg, which is mostly the Turkish neighborhood, with a lot more immigrants now than before. So yeah, a museum moves forward. This idea of a Jewish museum now Germany will have, 3 million immigrants, people coming, escaping from Syria. So it's important that one understands these out of jointness also as coming together in this place. I had another chance to win a competition in Germany, which I called Fault Lines. It's a competition for the Military History Museum of Germany, which is in Dresden. And what does it mean to build a military history museum in Germany? That's the question. What do you do in such a project? You all know, many of you have been to Dresden. It's one of the most, it was considered, it still is, one of the most beautiful cities, Baroque cities in Europe, with amazing architecture, amazing works. It's in paintings of Bellotto and so on, it was shown to be one of the great artistic capitals of the world. You probably may have not seen this photograph. Immediately after the Allied bombings in 1945, in April of 1945, a completely leveled city just gone, completely, just a ruin. And I don't know whether you've read the 2 volumes, they're written in German, but I had to read them in English, of Victor Klemperer, who was a professor of philology in Dresden, a great intellectual, a Jew but a German, who wrote his experiences. I bear witness. What happened in Dresden to him, to his wife. How slowly, from being a professor at the highest levels of the intellectual life, he descended into a non-life and into the hope at the very end of his life that Dresden would be bombed because it would be the only way he could possibly survive. If there was a conflagration, he said, maybe they could escape. It's an interesting, that's the background of my project for the Military History Museum in Germany. And this is my idea. The museum is a kind of an arrow. It's a vector sitting in an old armory, and it is a self-similar form to the 3 points from which Dresden was bombed in the Allied bombings. So here it is. It's, by the way, the largest museum in Germany. You should not be surprised. German military history is big. It's by far the largest museum in Germany. The armory, which you see was built at the end of the 19th century, was already used as a museum in the 1890s. And then it was a continually museum of different governments, Saxon government, of the Kaiser, of the Nazis, of the Soviets, of East Germany. And then after the fall of the wall, the question was, what do we do with this building? How do we go on with German history goes on in a new Germany? So that's what it is. I inserted a completely new form into this, and I restored the armory. The armory is a protected building, but I didn't damage it in any way. I just cut it in a very delicate way and put really a new space. And here it is in plan. It's a model. You can see that there is a horizontal structure of the armory, which is columns and so on, arches. It has many different facilities. And the story is told chronologically from Teutonic Knights all the way to today's German involvement in Afghanistan or NATO or whatever. But this horizontal history is disrupted by the wedge, which peeks out of the building itself, exactly in those 2 little points between 1914 and 1945. I think the years which brought the worst of militarisms and evils from Germany. So it interrupts it, and then you continue on your way in the horizontal. So horizontal and vertical structure. And you can see it here, how it is very peculiarly and very precisely lodged in this system of construction. Of course, it has to incorporate incorporate all the significant elements of the grand stair of the 19th century. It was very badly treated in by the East Germans. It was really kind of a ruin, just patched up with very kitschy motifs, bad lighting. They took away some of the capitals of the columns. So I tried to restore it. I wouldn't say lovingly, but restore it so that you could see the contrast of what that armory was built for and what the museum is today. And that's really the main, it overlooks Dresden. It's a whole Saxon area for the army, which is a very powerful area in the city. And you can see here this wedge, this vector, which is sort of looming outside, penetrating through the stone walls. And the contrast is apparent. By the way, the form that sticks out is it's translucent. It's not really a closed space. It's like a veil. And it has a platform, visitor's platform. But I want to say that the entire space is taken out by this form. It moves to the opacity of the space. It's not a facade. It's not just a decorative idea. It's the space that is pushing through, and of course on the interior restored the old arches, and then the arches are cut. Cut by this completely different structure, which is concrete. It's leaning. It's complex. And I like that the exhibition designers have the running text of Clausewitz, that war is politics conducted by other means. And it's it's really a meditation on violence and on war. And I have to say, only in Germany could I build a military history museum which comes close to talking about peace. Because I've been to the military museums, and I built a military museum in England, and there are military museums in America and France. They're all about forward, 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 forward. This is a museum that makes one think, because as you ascend that stair within the context of the horizontal structure, you see very strange exhibitions also. Hage Merz and Barbara Holzer were excellent designers here of the interior. I mean, you see the exhibitions on animals and war. And we know about the elephants, and the lions of Judah, but we don't often think of, chemical warfare, biological warfare. It's also employing nature for extensive ends of technologically eliminating humanity in one form or another. And there's another passage to the museum, toys. How interesting to see, toys, what kids play with. And also just the drama of being able to see large scale, like V2 rockets or elements of weaponry, like that helicopter, displayed not as objects of war, but displayed in a different sense, with a kind of sense of being distanced from them. And what does this space contain? Well, this space contains questions. There's no answers. The questions to the audience. Why do people follow fanatical leaders? Why do people hate other people? Why are people willing to follow orders to kill and shoot? No answers can be given. And it's a very special museum. The answers are not given. People can make their own tour through this museum. And by the way, this museum is like West Point in America. This is where officers of the German army come to study the vast history. As you go up toward what they call the Dresden Blick, the Dresden view, you have the remnants and fragments of bombings of cities that were bombed from Dresden. Wieliczka in Poland, Coventry in England, Rotterdam. Many cities, the Air Force from Dresden bombed European cities. And you come out through this kind of a special space, and you ascend, you go out of the museum altogether. You're suspended. It's very hard to give you the feeling, because if you have you're suspended slightly on a diagonal towards, on the left, the view of Dresden. So you can see the beautiful Frauenkirche rebuilt. You can see the rebuilding of Dresden, beautiful in the panorama. But you are also, at the same time, implicated in that triangulation from which Dresden vanished and is a new city. It's a simultaneous, talking about ambiguity and contradiction. You're seeing the new view of the city while you're standing in a self-similar triangle to that from which Dresden vanished from that map. And it's a very special experience. It's an experience both of, you're exhilarated seeing finally you're out of the museum, you're out of the military history, but you're also in a new matrix of that history. And I have to say the museum is popular. Popular not only with people who like weapons and stuff like that, but it has educational programs. There is a cafe, it's a library. And given how much war there is in this world, how much violence, I think the idea of, and I have to say, I worked in Germany on many projects, but I truly appreciate Germany, because the jury was not a civilian jury. It was generals the Air Force, of the Army. And there were many, many projects. Most of the projects were a courtyard in the back, a glass court in the back, leaving the facade as it was. But the jury selected to say, it's good to show that out of jointness, that there is something out of joint here. And out of joint are those militaristic things that threaten us not only then, but today as well. Okay, something on a very different level. Another museum, which I was lucky to win in a competition in one of my favorite cities, Toronto. Nina, my wife, comes from Toronto. We live there, and it's a museum which is, built. It's called the Royal Ontario Museum. It's the largest museum in Canada. It has both like natural history museum and an art museum, like the Metropolitan in New York, both in one, built in the late 1900s, early 20th century. And you can see this crystalline form. And really, I was inspired, I have to say truly, when I was there, by a little crystal that I saw. And I do love crystals. And I do agree with Frank Lloyd Wright, who said that if a building is not a crystal, it's not a good building. So kind of I agree with this master of mine. So it's a major public institution. I had to, reorient it. The main entrance used to be on University Avenue, which is this big avenue here, which is now more like a traffic artery. I reoriented to Bloor Street, the main street, like the Fifth Avenue, and it's a complex weave of buildings. You can see that I don't like just doing facades. It's not nice to do a nice facade and behind it have a cube or something. To me, it's nice I enjoy that the whole space is out of joint as well, just goes into a different direction. And it originates from that small crystal on the inside, which is a kind of a central crystal giving birth to 5 different structures that have the different galleries and different exhibits. And it's inserted into a historical building without camouflaging that it is a completely new building. You can see it in the roof plan. There's a restaurant, different galleries, main stairs, main access points. And it created also a kind of a new sense of urbanity on the street itself. The crystals are also used to deflect light in different ways because, Toronto is north, so you want to have interesting light in the building and very large-scale vitrines, into which you can see at night the mega collections of dinosaurs. It's one of the best collections of dinosaurs in the world. So fantastic to have a building with dinosaurs and entrance and these linear slots, these small windows, and they do relate to dinosaurs, to ancient things in the museum. And the museum is connected to its old fabric through a court that I created. That is also one of the major public spaces in Toronto for film festival, for social events. There are the sort of bridges across that central crystal and large temporary art galleries that are very flexible. This is not a trick photograph. It just looks like that. It's you see that you're in a post-perspective space because seeing art and nature, we are already in a post-perspective. We can't see them in perspective. So you don't see them in perspective. And there's a contemporary art center. There is a fantastic restaurant, very popular with the public of Toronto. And that's really just across from the new music school. So, it's a building that does many different spatial things that have to do with the program of the building. And of course, I have to say very clearly that you can't build such a building alone. You have to work very closely with the experts, the curators, people. And by the way, most curators don't really want white or black boxes. I had the same experience when I was building the Denver Art Museum. They said, we don't want it anymore. We want something else because art has changed and the way people perceive the world has changed. So let's change also the space of exhibitions. That's the building in Toronto, and I think it had a good impact on making many other buildings in Toronto more radical, more interesting. It used to be considered Toronto the good, kind of English, waspy city. It's a city of immigrants, from the Arab world, from Africa, from Asia. It's fantastic. Young people have no problem with it. It was very controversial with the elder generation. Of course, it was out of joint. Okay, something I never did before. I hesitated to work in China for personal reasons, not for ideological reasons. But then I got a chance to be asked to do a museum in Wuhan, in China. And I said yes, because it's the first non-government museum of history. It's a privately funded museum. And I said, sure. It's not going to be a propaganda museum. It's a museum of history of China in Wuhan, which is the center of China. And it's dedicated to Zhang Zhidang, who looks like Confucius, doesn't he? He's amazing. You probably don't know who he is, but around the Xinhai Revolution, together with Sun Yat-sen, he was an amazing guy who realized that China, with all these colonial powers, the only way for China to succeed is to transform itself industrially. So he started all the steelworks in China. He bought, from Luxembourg, and I thought, how interesting that's the formative time of China, of the new China. And China, of course, is undergoing transformations, and it's that's the old factory, and it's on the Yangtze River, and that's a contradiction because almost everything old is disappearing in China. With every new leader, everything else disappears. But I thought, let's make a building and let's try to keep as much of this old factory, which were still operating there when I was there a few years ago. Steel was being made in very, very primitive methods. So I thought of the building that could deal with history, that could refer to many things in Wuhan that are not so obvious, the mythology of Wuhan, and a building that would preserve at least that large wing that you see of industrial works in a completely new area of of development. So there it is, creating a big kind of public space, convert the industrial buildings, and then create a massive building. It's a very large building, like everything else in China. It's large, but lift the building up so that it's really the surroundings that are visible, and create a great panoramic windows that allow you to view that area. It's really different exhibitions, the Zhang Zhidang exhibition, industrial exhibition, Wuhan exhibition. The silos that support the structure have themselves different kind of collections. So it has a very light footprint. I think maybe it's the heaviest building ever built on the smallest two legs that provide the theaters of exhibition, that provide the silo of exhibitions, the Wuhan exhibition itself, the lounge, the terrace, the restaurants, and so on. It's under construction. I have to tell you, it's not very easy to build a building in China. A lot of my colleagues, famous architects, have built buildings which look great in photographs, but when you go 2-3 years later, they're falling apart. So I asked if we could build a mock-up, a mock-up to test, and they said nobody ever asked us to do it. Now, I had a good client who agreed to do it because, it cost some money. The first mock-up, I cannot tell you, it was incredible. Nothing aligned. There was nothing, to make a sustainable building, a building should not fall apart, number one, right? It should hold together. The glue should hold together. The materials should really link and stay fixed and stable. It wasn't that. Second, I asked them to do a second one. It was a little bit better. And I understood because the workforce in China is from the countryside. They have never done anything like that. So it's very difficult. It's a challenge to do. And my challenge here is to build a sustainable building, really building that really operates with low energy, which has very good construction methods, which is exciting to the public, which works for the client, which works for the exhibits, and which will certainly change this area. And it's a very exciting project. It's, it will take still more time to build it. I don't have very good photographs. You can see the scale. You can see the power of Chinese cities rising. It's a challenge. Okay, metamorphosis. That's in a place that I love, and I also live partly in Milan, where we did a competition. I was on a team with Generali. There are many. I think every architect that I know was in this competition. But we entered together, myself, Zaha Hadid, and Arata Isozaki, and Generali, the insurance companies. And we were lucky to win. And I did the master plan. And it's in the center of Milan. It's where the Fiera di Milano used to be. They moved out to the suburbs. And the idea was to really turn the space to a green piazza at the center with a connection of the Metropolitana, build housing, really pick up the scale of housing on the periphery of the site. In the center, build large-scale office buildings. There are 3 of them, retail and so on. Preserve the old hall, and kind of really develop the area in a sustainable way, which is new. At the center stand the 3 towers. Isuzaki's tower on the right is finished. Zaha's tower on the left is under construction. My tower in the center is just beginning. So that's kind of the center of the open public space. And it's really to create a three-dimensional sense of work in this exciting new and old place. But it's really also how to bring the old 19th century scale of Milan. You see on the left, where my project is, how to bring lower scale buildings and make them higher towards the park and create a sense of community in a very, very high density project. It's a very, very high density. Buildings are very, very large. So how do you break up the scale of the buildings? How do you create good apartments which are, of course, economically viable, have the same floor plate, but give expression in terms of the extensive terracing, the large-scale open areas which are very, very large, can be used for dining and for parties and so on. So that's really the vehicle I used with, screening the building in different ways. It's really, I think it's the biggest challenge to create interesting housing, because it's economically driven, it's technically driven, and yet how do you provide individuality in terms of the large number of people, thousands of people who will live there? So I created, this garden. There's, by the way, you can access underground with your car to the core of the building. It's massive. It's very, very large. It has many buildings with good views, interesting places to live, and spaces that don't exist in Milan because the floor plates are very different. Light is different, the technology is different, amenities are different, the way it's constructed is different. So it's a technical building, but again, it's more like vertical. I broke this large horizontal theme into verticality, and I think it looks well in even with these beautiful Art Nouveau villas, and it's certainly rising, and the site is going to be completed in a few years. I think it will really be, a new living, working recreational center in the center of Milan. Another project which is close to my heart, because I was born in Poland, and that's a contradiction, because I was born under a real communist government, and now Poland is free, and I speak the language, and I see the change of the country. I made this. What do you do to do a residential tower across from the palace that I saw as a kid? It's the Stalin, the inevitable palace of culture. More misuse in language I've never seen. Palace of culture by Stalin, which is built to oppress the people. But I had a chance to build really the tallest residential tower in Europe. It's about 65 stories high. It's almost completed. You can see the vastness of the palace of Stalin on top. You can see on the right a gigantic new shopping center. And there in the corner, you can see rather a small footprint of a high-rise building. Now, of course, to create a interesting residential tower that has some meaning, of course, you have to extrude a tower. You have to do something very simple, give it a nice color, use good materials, make it sustainable. But I want to do something a little bit more to express in this tower a kind of a movement away and towards the center of the city, and also to affirm that the center of the city is not public. It should also be for people to live. It's not only for exercise of ideology. You can see that building is also cantilevered. The building is offset of its base. The base is as retail, but it's slightly offset. You can see it here. It's turned in different directions to take advantages of the fantastic, beautiful Warsaw, which is a city of great culture and great beauty, and to give also, you design from inside out, from residential requirements, residential apartments, and requirements of the client to create good retail, good place to have amenities, views, of course, in such a high tower. And tower is almost complete. It was not that easy to build. Again, Poland has great workmanship, great workers, but to build the first large-scale residential tower in the center of the city is a challenge. And it's a dialogue. You can see it's a dialogue. It has to do with my own childhood. I have photographs. I'm standing in front of that palace with my sister. And that's the only place you take a photograph, because it's like the only thing visible. The rest was just a rubble. But it is a building that really has become part of Warsaw. It's, I think, will be elegant building when it's finished with interiors, well constructed. And I think it will say something else. It will say we should have high density living for people in the center of the city. Don't develop the city with low-rise, 3-story houses out into the countryside, built where the emptiness was created, particularly after the tragedies of World War II. And don't be afraid. And right now we have hotels. There are hotels and office buildings, but residential, I think, is the key to a good city. Having people live in the center of the city. Okay, my favorite smallest project, because I never did a small project. I realized I started with a big project, and I never had a chance to do a house. And all architects say, you know, the best thing to do is a house, and I agree with them. So I had a chance to do a small house for a couple in Connecticut. First time they came to me, they said, Mr. Libeskind, would you like to build a house? I said, you sure you want me to be the architect? They said, yeah. Yeah, we love to cook, we like to entertain. So I said, great, that's a fantastic idea. Very small house. It's kind of a folded form, as you can see, creating many different sections within the house, many different expressive senses. And I call it expressive because the word expression has a very dirty word in architecture, you know? You know, if you have something say expression, it's considered really the lowest word because architecture should be neutral, should be objective. But, you know, everybody in Switzerland even loves espresso coffee because it's the expression of coffee. It's not the watered down American version. So yes, expression is very important and expressive architecture, and it's sitting in this field in Connecticut. Doesn't actually, I didn't want to make a house that looks like a house. And I had good clients because they said, you know, we love that the exterior should be cold and hard, like a knife, but the interior should be really, really comfy. So the house is built in a self-supporting way. It's really a structure that has no columns. It's a self-supporting system, stainless steel that reflects, because of its angularity. The house doesn't really have a stable color either. It's hard to show it. It has different, depending where you approach it from, depending on what season. And I stayed away from large windows either, because I want to make a sustainable house. Just porches, just the light in the morning, in the evening, where you want to go, where you have the activities. Not the picture house, you know, of America. You know, the large view of the mountains and stuff like that. Just a kind of a modest house. It's pretty modest, though. It's stainless steel. It's kind of user friendly because I worked closely with my clients, very closely. To accommodate. And by the way, they asked me to do the interiors. So the interiors are solid wood. They are not wood paneling. They are not wood veneer. They are like oak, thick oak. And I even designed the carpet, the bookshelves, the sofa. I mean, this is like a Gesamtkunstwerk, this little house. Like, they said, why don't you do this? Why don't you do our kitchen? Well, I didn't do the equipment, but they're very good cooks as well. So you can see the house has this double presence, and it has nice lighting. It doesn't have a lot of over lighting from the top. It has the kind of shower and bath that I really like, and they like it too. And I was even able to design the faucet, because I really hate faucets. You know, they really look like they're from England in 19th century, all of them. You know, even the Arne Jacobson, you know, they all look like they're about health. But I wanted to make them look like they're about the line. You know, just, you know, when you close them off, they become a perfect straight line. And then even a fireplace, very, very cozy. Very cozy. And looks nice at night. It has kind of glowing light. The only mistake I made in this house, I have to tell you, is that our clients are so nice. They said, would you like to sleep in the house for a weekend? So Nina and I said, sure. And after that, Nina said to me, every day, why don't we have a house like this? And now I'm really in trouble. And so the house is also the line. It blurs the line between sculpture and architecture. It blurs the line between, you know, but it keeps a very unambiguous line between the intimacy of the interior and the extremity, I would say, of the coldness of the exterior. And my clients just send me this picture. They say they take pictures of the house, and they said it always has a bizarre, strange light color. You can't predict what color it will have because it depends. You know, I guess light is very complex. My son is an astrophysicist. He's tried to explain to me, but light is very complex. So I don't even know why one part of this house is purple and another one is towards gold, but that's what it looks like. It's very pleasant. Okay, now really this is the most complex project I think anybody, and I certainly am humbled to have undertaken it, because I cannot tell you how complicated what I called memory foundations are, the ground zero in New York. And often I'm asked, where were you on September? Everybody knows where they were September 11th, just as they know where, if they're old enough, where Kennedy was assassinated. Where was I? I was in Berlin, in the studio in Berlin, because I was living in Berlin. September 11th was the date that the Jewish Museum was to open to the public. That's the day I waited for 13 years, since I moved to Berlin. 2:38 to be exact, in the afternoon, somebody shouted, "Look at this image," in New York, the falling towers. And the Jewish Museum did not open that evening, did not open the second day, did not open the third day. And I suddenly realized that history is not something you can just package and say, everything is linked in strange ways and out of joint in strange ways. And at that very moment, when I saw those pictures, I turned to Nina and I really did say that. I said, I'm returning to New York. I'm an immigrant to New York. I said, I'm returning to Lower Manhattan. And how strange that I actually, by strange accident, won the competition to be the master planner of this very important site, which, as you know, was completely devastated. There were many, the competition had thousands of architects, really, thousands of experts, thousands of planners, thousands of historians. I did it with a small team, our team in Berlin. We did it in Berlin. And I did something very different from the 7 finalists at the end. Because all the finalists recreated large-scale buildings, either one megastructure, 2 megastructures, the Kissing Towers of Foster, large scale by Richard Meyer, everything large, mega, victory. I thought we should build nothing in the center of the site. Because even though it's still a piece of real estate, nobody declared it anything but a piece of real estate, I thought it was not right to build where people died. You should not build anything. You should preserve it as a public space and a memorial. And by the way, I had my own ideas about symbols, important symbols. 1776, the height of the Freedom Tower, Tower number 1, to arrange the buildings at the periphery of the site, as far from the center as possible. Not in the center, but push them away and create an ensemble of buildings. And by the way, that's a very radical idea, to create as low a set of buildings as possible and as many as possible. So instead of 1 big one, 2 big ones, 3 big ones, 5 that descend in scale. And that's for 2 reasons. Number one, they're better. In a big city, lower buildings are actually better than high buildings. They don't create the wind tunnel effects and the negative aspects of tall buildings. And second of all, they can be actually built economically, because economy is also out of joint, always. Nobody has the money to build, mega structures or even big buildings. You have to wait till some people have some money. So that's the phasing idea. And I show this to you not out of vanity or something, but to tell you who the stakeholders. This is not a one person who is in charge. We've got the families of the victims. There are thousands of people, 3,000 people, almost 3,000 people died, but there are thousands of family members. Now, children, sons, uncles, daughters, cousins. I mean, it's an extensive field of thousands of people who I thought were my primary group to talk to. Those are the important people. Then there is the Port Authority, mega organization of 7,000 architects and engineers, politically controlled by the governor of New York and governor of New Jersey, who owns the land and leases the land to private architects, to private developers and their own architects. So it's a business. Then there's the mayor of New York, in charge of anything that you do on the streets of New York, is in charge of the mayor of New York. Underground, you have the PATH trains, that's PATH train authority, and subways, different authorities. And then you have federal government, because there are federal rules here of transportation, federal highways, like West Street. So you can imagine this is a very complicated project which requires one thing in the world, in my view, and that's what I did. not just aesthetics and not nice renderings, but to bring a consensus, a political consensus towards culture. What is it about? What is this site about? That's my drawing, my sketch from long ago. Kind of a quick sketch, distributing the buildings, empty, the site, footprints, towers, and one of the latest perspectives. Pretty close. And you know, it's not about building a building. A lot of people say, you know, you're compromised on the building doesn't look like that. It's much harder to build a neighborhood than to build a building and to make it come as you really want to come, given how many complex partners there are. And it is really just like that. There is the Hudson River, there is the site, there is the circle that I drew, the circle of buildings standing in the grid but on the periphery. Ground zero at the center, the memorial with the footprints, and that arrow, the wedge of light, and additional public space which I created, which I'll explain in a minute. But I show this diagram because what is most important is what's underground. There's 75 feet underground of levels. Trains, maybe 5 days after the attacks, trains between New Jersey and New York were running. In this devastation. It's the lifeblood of New York, the work. So what you have to plan for is all the foundations, all the security, all the constructability of the whole project at the very beginning. And you don't see the results. Now it's what, 14 years after the attacks, 12 years since I started working. But it's, you know, you have to have patience. And that was actually the slurry wall. I have to tell you, you descend through the visitor center, and I have to tell you this anecdote, because I was standing with the most famous architects in the world, my colleagues, at One Liberty Plaza, looking down at the site during the competition in a November day, the rainy and gray November day. And somebody from the Port Authority of New York said, does anybody want to go to the site? All the architects were there, the 7 finalists. And everybody said, no, it's much, much better to be here because we can see the whole site right from our window, overlooking the site. One Liberty Plaza, right there. But something said to me, no, and Nina said, no, I want to go. I want to go to the site. And really, I think it was the revelation of walking down, very difficult walk, 75 feet down this ramp, mud, with this engineer. And when you stand there, all of New York disappears. You're so deep down. You're at the bedrock level where the towers collapsed. And I touched this wall, and the guy said to me, that's the slurry wall. Believe me, I studied architecture, but I had no idea what a slurry wall was. And he explained to me, you know, it's a dam. On the other side is Hudson River. This is a dam built to hold the waters of the Hudson River on the other side. And then I said, oh my God, I understand what the project is about. It's not at all what I was planning in Berlin. I got a telephone, because I don't carry a telephone, but Nina always does. And I called the studio, I think it was 2 o'clock at night. People were working on the project. And I said, forget all the things that you've been doing. It's just nonsense. I had a completely new idea that it should be really about this space. And Jean-Lucien, yes, was there. That's right, at 2 o'clock, even later. And that it should really be, I had a kind of revelation what it's about. It's about this site, this emptiness, this wall, not to have buildings there at all, push the building somewhere else. And that's indeed what it is. The slurry wall is the underground, the museum is underground. By the way, it's a fantastic museum with millions of visitors. It's not a story of tragedy only, it's a story of heroes, people who did amazing things across the world during that time. And it's a very moving wall. It's very hard, by the way, to preserve a living foundation. This is a foundation that supports ground zero. The engineers of the Port Authority, I would never have been able to do it had they not allowed me to do it. They said, we want to do it. It's very hard to keep this open because how do you keep a foundation open for people? But they somehow did it. Part of it is covered, but the original part is still there. And I was just there a few days ago with the Pope and with the representatives of the major religions who spoke. The Pope spoke against, with the background of this wall. And I thought, that's true. That's the deepest spot. Only workers of New York who build the buildings ever get to do that. But he was a Pope with a papal message of ecumenical peace. It was beautiful. The memorial site, of course, had to be a public space, the largest public space. And I want to tell you, there are 16 acres. The site is 16 acres. 8 acres is public space. It's very difficult with so much density. 10 million square feet of office space, 6 million square feet of other facilities, some 2 million of infrastructure. It's very difficult to have open space, but New York needs open space. That's what architecture is about. It's about public space. And by the way, beautiful memorial. When I proposed in the competition, waterfalls, there was a headline, there was a front page in the New York Post, the absurdity of Libeskind's ideas. How can you bring Niagara Falls to New York? That's a crazy thing, but it happened. And they are very moving. And in Michael Arad's design, they're very beautiful with the names carved, and it's really, my idea was that the water is needed to screen the sound of the noise of New York, and also bring the sense of nature somehow into this very hardscape site. And it's a living site. It's under construction. The PET terminal is under construction. Tower number 1 is finished. People are moving in. Tower number 4 is finished by Markets. People are moving in. Tower number 3 is very, very visible. Tower number 2 will be starting very soon. So it's really underway. But I want to show you in this photograph, I just took it a couple of days ago, that the victory of this project is not to be counted by the forms of urban design. It's, to me, by the number of people who have moved to Lower Manhattan. When I came to Lower Manhattan, most Lower Manhattan was empty. People moved out to New Jersey. They left the country. Many went away. Since I started working, 100,000 people have moved to Lower Manhattan. And that was my idea. It's a rebirth. It's an affirmation of life. Schools, families. It's no longer just the Wall Street. And what no one could predict at the time when I started working on it, it has to do with the design. Everybody thought this would be more Wall Street. Give us large trading floors. I kept the buildings very slender, as slender as I could, given the pressure of developers. Keep the footprints as small as possible. And now, to everybody's surprise, this is an area of creativity. It's the media companies, it's Condé Nast, it's media companies, it's art companies, it's Fox News and Fox Films, and so it's a totally different area than it was supposed to be, which was more of Wall Street. I think this is very special. I took liberty during the competition to propose an extra public space, because not enough public space in New York. It's crowded with people. I call it the wedge of light, a space from Broadway, which is defined by 2 hours, 8:46 a.m. when the first tower was struck, and 10:28 when the second tower collapsed, which is now the center of the PET terminal mega skylight. So it's a kind of a symbolic entry in the light of that beautiful morning. I photographed this from tower number 4, from the roof of tower number 4, but it's distorted. But you can see the foundation of tower number 2, right, on top. The southern foundation of the tower has that angle, and you can see the angle of the torqued PET terminal of Calatrava as a kind of a new gateway, which also embraces the dotted line, embraces St. Paul's Church, which is a very important part of the composition. As you look from ground zero towards Broadway, you see St. Paul's Church. By the way, it's a church where George Washington and the founders of America went to pray after his inauguration. And it has a lot to do with this aftermath of 9/11. So that's in the works. That will happen, I think, within the next years. And of course, the building standing in some sort of a echo of the Torch of Liberty, which to me is a very there it is in construction. This is some year, maybe a year ago, but you can see where the things are. You can see tower number 1. You can see the wedge of light. You can see the footprints of the buildings standing within the grid, bringing the granite street through, bringing the streets through. You can see the visitor center, the footprints, the slurry wall, and so on. And here you can see pretty accurately from the air during the construction. On the bottom, tower number 2 with an angle. You have the PET terminal with its own angle. Tower number 1 on the right. Tower number 3, which is already much higher. Tower number 4, which is finished. Tower number 5, the church still to come. So the new skyline of New York, But the new skyline is not really just what I thought about. It was really, you know, as I said, I was an immigrant, and I came by ship. I was one of the last immigrants to come by ship because it was cheaper to fly later on. Everybody flew into Kennedy, but being on a ship, being woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, my sister and I standing on the deck. You're gonna see New York. You're gonna see New York, and it's true. There's nothing to prepare you for the impact. You know, when you're 13 years old, even if you've seen movies with New York, postcards or books, the impact of New York and of the Statue of Liberty, which later on I found out has an inscription by Emma Lazarus, famous American Jewish poet, which says, "Give me your poor, your tired masses who are yearning to be free. Give us the immigrants," it says. "Come to us, those who have no place." That's what this project is about. It's about New York, it's about America, it's about the world, it's about freedom, it's about liberty, and it's about people. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.